I want you to think a moment with me. What's the first thing that comes to your mind when you hear the grace of God? Maybe get a little piece of paper right now and write down what your descriptions or definitions are when you hear the grace of God. Now, many of you may be writing down forgiveness. You may be writing down salvation. You may be writing down God's love. You may be writing down His unmerited favor that's a free gift. And all of these are absolutely accurate, correct answers. But what I'm curious about is how many of you on your paper right now, or in your mind, your list that you're making in your mind, how many of you have written down empowerment? You know, it's interesting. We did a survey on what the grace of God means to thousands of American Christians. Now, on this survey, they were simply asked to do exactly what I just asked you to do. What is your definition or description of the grace of God? Write it down. It can be one word or several words. It is interesting, the answers that I just gave were the overwhelming majority of the answers that were given. However, only 2%, and it's actually less than 2%, were that grace is God's empowerment. Now, what's interesting is this. God Himself literally defines grace as His empowerment. He says in 2 Corinthians chapter 12, verse 9 to the Apostle Paul, he said, "My grace is sufficient for you, for my power is made perfect in your weakness or inability." God literally defines grace as His power. If you look at Peter, Peter makes this statement in 2 Peter chapter 1, verses 2 and 3. "Grace be multiplied to you in the knowledge of God as His divine power." If you look at Hebrews chapter 12, verse 29 and 30, God says, "Therefore, since we're receiving a kingdom which cannot be shaken, let us have grace whereby we can serve God acceptably." Grace gives us the power to serve God acceptably. Now, you say, "John, this is just semantics or definitions." No, it's not. Because here's what the Bible says. The Bible says that we literally apprehend the power of grace through faith. In other words, when we believe what God has spoken, then it becomes a part of our life. With many Christians today, they are living in their own natural ability, when in reality, grace gives us the ability to go beyond our natural ability. You see, if 2% of the Christians believe that grace is God's empowerment, that means 98% or 980 believers out of 1,000 are literally living this life in their own strength, no different than the world. This is the reason why we've got so many of the difficulties and the problems and even sin in the church. And that seems to be evident in the world as well, is because we're not living in God's ability. God has called you to live extraordinarily. This is not a dream. This is His desire. This is His passion. This is His will for your life. What does it mean to live extraordinarily? It means to go beyond the norm, beyond the usual. It's the opposite of living normal. It's to break out of the status quo. Well, there is no way that you can live an extraordinary life except through the grace of God. When you realize that God's grace is also not only His forgiveness of sin, but not only your entrance into heaven, but also His empowerment in your life, well, guess what? You begin to do exactly what the Bible says. You begin to live as a light, a bright light, in the area, the sphere of life that you're called into. Jesus said to us, we are the lights of the world. We cannot be the light of the world in our ability. We've got to do it by the extraordinary power of God's grace.